So welcome back. In this week's video we are going to be looking at the right to be forgotten under the GDPR, also known as the right to erasure. This is a really important right that individuals have under the regulation, but a lot of people do find it quite complicated, so we're going to look at what it is, what it means, and also how to action it if you get a request. As we always say, if you do find this video useful or you find it interesting, please do give us a like, give us a share, and feel free to comment down below. And of course, if you've got any questions, please do just give us a shout. So what is the right to be forgotten? Well, the right to be forgotten is as it sounds. It's a right within the regulation, often called the right to erasure. It gives individuals the right to contact a controller or contact an organisation who is holding or processing their personal information and ask them for that information to be deleted and to be removed from their systems. The key thing to point out here is that the right to be forgotten, or the right to erasure, is not what is known as an absolute right. What that means is that there are a number of exemptions. So while individuals can request that their information is deleted and they can request that their information is forgotten from your systems, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to comply with it immediately. And there are a number of things that surround it that mean that it's not always pertinent, or it's not always necessary for an organisation to forget somebody from their system just because they have asked. And that's what we're going to look at next. So when you receive a right to be forgotten request, the first thing to do is to look at your systems, look at your relationship with the individual, and try and understand why you were processing their information in the first place. If you were processing the individual's information purely on the basis of consent, and the individual has retracted that consent, and you have no other lawful basis for processing that information, then you should remove that individual's information from your systems. Also, if you receive a request for erasure or a request to be forgotten, and you have finished using the information that you collected for the particular purpose in which you collected that information in the first place, then again you should be looking to action that request and remove that information from your systems, because you no longer need to have that information, so there's no really reason for you to maintain a record of that information anymore. The exemption really begins to apply if you have a legitimate overriding interest or overriding legal requirement to maintain a record of that individual, and that overrides the individual's right to be forgotten. Now, very often what we tend to see is that organisations require information for audit purposes, they require information for tax purposes, they require information for dealing and managing complaints and future complaints. And obviously for the statute of limitations, that generally lies at around 6 years. That will vary from organisation to organisation, and in certain sectors there will be a requirement to keep information for a longer period of time, especially if there are legal obligations or legal requirements to keep a record of that information, for instance in the healthcare sector. So it's really important when you receive a right to be forgotten request that you assess it, you look at it, you understand why your organisation keeps the information, and then you determine whether or not you have a legitimate overriding interest in maintaining that. And if you don't, that's at the point that you start to look at dealing with those requests. This also applies if you're dealing with employees or an ex-employee who was requested to be forgotten from your system. Obviously you do not need to comply with that if you have an overriding or legitimate legal interest in maintaining a record of that information for a certain period of time. But do be prepared, obviously, to delete that information at the end. You can't just keep stuff forever for no particular reason. So the benefits of complying with a right to be forgotten request are, of course, as always, that you're going to be running in line with the requirements of the regulation. It also means that you're not keeping information on individuals that you don't need to be keeping and you don't have a purpose for maintaining. That's going to help your business reduce its risk profile, and obviously it's going to help avoid any regulatory action against you. What's really important here actually is that the right to be forgotten is an important right for subjects, but if you are employing good records retention and good records management within your organisation, then actually the use of the right to be forgotten becomes not very wide. There doesn't really become a great deal of use for it at all. If your systems and your processes are aligned to maintain a record of information for a certain period of time to run in line with a record retention schedule, and information is set to be deleted in line with that retention schedule, then you should find that when you receive a right to be forgotten request, that actually if you are going to decline it because you have a legitimate interest in maintaining that information, then in fact in a few years time or in a set period of time that information will be removed from your systems. So when you receive a request that is one that can be actioned, you should actually end up finding that the information has already been removed because you've got those retention and those records management structures in place. So this is really about making sure that you've got good records retention and good records management systems in place, but it's also about not balking at the fact that you've got a right to be forgotten request and immediately assuming that you need to respond to it and you need to delete that information from your systems. So to remove the information from your systems is going to vary wildly depending on what technologies you've been using, what CRM you're using, what systems, what networks and what controls you've got in place. It is very, very hard from a technical perspective to actually delete information entirely from a system. Sometimes it is advisable to look to obfuscate that information or make it inaccessible to your employees or to people within your organisation to ensure that it can't be processed, even if you can't physically delete it from your systems. So there are considerations that you need to give there, but where possible, obviously the right to erasure means that you need to delete and remove that information from your systems. So you need to understand where that's possible, what the risk points are, and what you're going to do to be able to manage that. As always, if you have any questions or you'd like to know more, particularly about the right to be forgotten or how good records management and good records retention can help you manage that risk, then please do get in touch. As always, our website is across the bottom of the screen now, and you'll see my email at the end of this video. If you do have any questions or you enjoyed this video, please do obviously give us a subscribe, and we look forward to talking to you again next week. Thank you very much.